All right, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker. It's David Brin. He's one of the giants of the science fiction field. He's both critically acclaimed and also one of the most popular authors in the field. And he's also always impressed me with his ability to think outside the box. He's the epitome of what we call a futurist in science fiction. And we were fortunate enough that he agreed, despite his extremely heavy schedule, to give a talk today at the symposium. Thank you.
I'd like to thank my dear colleague, Catherine, one of the brilliant writers in the field, and John and Rick, rather, and pass on my greetings to my fearless Jason Derleth, in wearing my other hat as an advisor for NASA NIAC, and my colleagues Mark Mellis and Alan Steele and the rest of you there. Yeah, it's a terribly important topic, and let's try to just race through a few thoughts. So I'm just a little bit, it's just a little bit awkward, so let's just move on. Oh, if you're tweeting, I'm at David Brin. Okay, so we've been moving our way through to the Chesley Bonestell world. We're having spaceships with fins that land on their tail. Wahoo! Someday perhaps we'll get the spinning wheels. Joe Carroll has some possible ways that we could approach that era. And we're talking a lot about possibilities of fighting in space. There's the stories from science fiction. Every high-level military officer, certainly in the Navy, read the book Ghost Fleet a few years ago, and it had some scary implications for what might go on in the high ground. Of course, this leads us to Space Force, which means that the only difference in space is that we'd have to reassign 500 skilled officers to design spandex uniforms, and then get liposuction to be able to fit in them. And then, of course, this is where we'd wind up. All right. So this is an obsolete. It's an old chart, but it shows some of our space endeavors. It shows us not quite reaching Pluto, and on January 1st, early in the morning, the New Horizons mission will fly past another object beyond. It's absolutely amazing. But what are we fixated on? Well, we're fixated on arguments between the moon and Mars and asteroids. And then there's a fourth type of target in the solar system, which is the most likely place to have life, and that's what are called roofed worlds. And there may be as many as a dozen of them in our solar system, ice-roofed oceans. And what this has demonstrated is one of the most epic and fantastic discoveries humanity ever made, and no one's talking about it. And that is the fact that almost every star we see in the sky probably has a liquid water ocean, even if it doesn't have a Goldilocks zone, because it probably has a moon or something that has a Europa-style ocean. Now, that is an absolutely amazing thing to think about. Okay, now we're having a lot of trade-offs now, and unfortunately, the moon versus asteroids thing has become enmeshed in politics, and this is really, really a shame, because if you actually rationally compare the two destinations, you start to realize that there is really no reason for the United States to want to go back to the lunar surface. There are no resources of any value there except possibly some polar water. If there are gigatons there, then sure, maybe we might make a fueling station there, but it's really, really difficult. NIAC has funded studies of what it would take to be able to work in those permanently dark craters. It's not easy. If there are only megatons of water there, then that water should be left for lunar colonists. There are various other things that might be going on, but Andy Weir, the author of Artemis and The Martian, struggled to find a justification in the near term for a lunar colony, and he said the only justification for going to the moon in the near future is tourism. And that's why the Chinese and Russians and Europeans and Indians and all those people want to go there. Well, we did our tourism, our bar mitzvah, today I am a man, on the moon 50 years ago. The lunar polar station, orbiter station, tourist services. That's what you do. Asteroids are easier to get to robotically, but not by humans because the times are a problem. But there are already people investing in the possibility of getting at the fantastic riches that are there. And that may be why some of the people who own mines on the Earth are opposed to asteroids. All right, so the sweet spot would be a lunar orbital station, and that happens to be what we're going to do. So interruptions and interference in science, nevertheless, we seem to be aimed at the right direction, and I'm all in favor of that. As a matter of fact, there's some extra reasons for a lunar polar station that I won't get into today. All right, now we all yearn for Mars. Isn't that beautiful? Of course, it could be made more beautiful if we melted all the water that's buried there and turned it into Kim Stanley Robinson's blue Mars. Fantastic. And I'm going to skip right past that. Because the topic today is about, modifying ourselves to be appropriate for spaceflight. Because really, that's going to be easier to do than changing the universe. We might adapt our children to be able to have larger eyes for darker worlds. They might have gills to settle Europa. They might be Khan. And there's also this possibility that we might have descendants who think of themselves as human, have human culture, carry forward some of our dreams, a lot of our dreams, but are made of different materials. And most of us probably could come to terms with that. We're already enhancing ourselves the old-fashioned way. And by the way, these are images from the gorgeous video trailer for my novel Existence, which you can get on my website, davidbrin.com. Go to the sub-site for Existence, click on the video trailer. It's the most fun you'll have in 3 minutes with your clothes on. So this is a street scene in San Diego, and everybody's augmented. So this is how we might augment in the future with prosthetics of vision, memory, and attention. You can see this character from my book not only has augmented reality goggles, but she has little stalks open into her hair that can rise up and peer in all directions, see who's behind her. They can detach and become drones and see who's in that alley just ahead. None of this stupid raising these slabs of glass over your head, which we do today. So these are augmentations that are already in the works. And like every other human augmentation of memory and vision, like the printing press and the radio, loudspeakers and all those things, and the web, we're going to abuse it and misuse it and use it for horrible purposes. That's just the way we are. But eventually, each of these augmentations does make us better and wiser overall. So augmentation may accelerate. These are more of these wonderful images from Patrick Bartley. We may change our children. Let's talk about augmentation for a minute. There's a whole list of methods by which we might do it. There's remedial interventions, nutrition, health, and education for all. Nothing could possibly make a bigger difference on this planet. When you take care of raising children up to the lower middle class, they wind up, their parents have fewer children, they wind up having 15 to 20 IQ points higher if they simply never go through periods of being hungry. And this is something that the right should care about because it provides the feedstock of talent for competition. Unfortunately, the right has forgotten the C word, the competition word, in favor of oligarchy, but maybe it will remember it again at some point. Adam Smith spoke of how we need to get at the maximum feedstock into our competitive arenas. Then there's stimulation, games that teach real mental skills. When we started having children, my wife and I thought that any day now we'll have wonderful games that teach, and we got crap. But there are preliminary signs that there are now games about to come out that can actually tell when the child has that aha moment, and that can help teach real mental skills. Some of you have seen Limitless and other shows about pharmacological nootropics that might expand our mental abilities. The military is certainly working on this, as I discussed in my novel Postman 25 years ago. Prosthetics, exoskeletons, telecontrol, military is hot on those, as it is on cyber neuro links, extending what we can see, know, perceive, and reach. Now we're starting to find out biological computing is actually impressive. Ray Kurzweil thought that we would get the singularity when a box, a brain-sized box, could contain as many circuit elements as there are neurons in the brain, about 100 billion. Well, we've passed that point in the last few years. But then we realized it's not neurons. It's every neuron has roughly 1,000 synapses, those flashy little bits that are more like circuit elements. So that would be 10 trillion at least that we need in a box. Well, Moore's law hasn't taken us there yet, but Ray says about to reach it. Only unfortunately, and all these Moore's law fans, we're finding out that for every synapse, there may be dozens or hundreds or even tens of hundreds of tiny computational little bits along the axons and dendrites. In other words, we may be spectacular beyond any of our previous reckonings, and it may be more difficult for AI to emulate us. But the next category is AI. And it'll either happen separately or it might happen in synergy. So let's hope the title of this conference is effective. There's lifespan extension. And if you look up my name, David Brin, and immortality, I will show you what a grouch I am. Certainly, I would like to live longer. I would like to have a larger health span. But there is reason to believe that humans have plucked all the low-hanging fruit already. With the Methuselahs of mammals, most mammals get 1 billion heartbeats, whether they're small or large. We get 3.5 billion heartbeats. And we had to, in order to make these children who are fetuses for 25 or 30 years. So the result is that every time you see some fantastic lifespan extension on fruit flies and mice, don't expect it to affect us. Finally, there's genetically altering humanity, which I talked about when I showed you Khan. All right, so let's move on. And a lot of this is discussed in my short story collection, Otherness, which also has this lovely Patrick Farley cover. All right, so in AI, we're going through what's called the big flip. And that is, some of you even called it Brin's flip. And that is that computational expansion was driven for the last 70 years by hardware. Moore's law with element packing and Dennard scaling for power reduction. And it was long predicted that the exponential of Moore's law would taper off. And it has. The last 5 years, certainly the last 3 years, Moore's law has been tapering off, having its S-curve. But ironically, or amazingly, software which sucked for 70 years, has taken off in the exact same time interval, with limitless application of big data and machine learning though it's becoming so good that we have no clear way of tracking how these machines are reaching the conclusions that they're reaching. And of course, there are all sorts of worries and frets and hand-wringings over governance by algorithm. Now, here's the interesting thing. I assert that about 40,000 years ago, we had a similar big flip ourselves. We kept getting gradually more intelligent through hardware development, grunt force evolving better hardware with crappy software. But starting 40,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, and then 10,000 years ago, and then 6,000 years ago, we went through a series of software reviews. And you can read about this in my novel. Okay, so general approaches to AI. One is the one that was tried for about 50 years, and that's creating logic, algorithms, and knowledge manipulation systems. These still have their uses, but they're mostly being used. That GoFi means good old-fashioned AI, Watson. These mostly are turning into tools for the next step, which is cognitive evolutionary neural net learning systems. These are the parts that have taken off. Emergent AI is the thing we see in science fiction flicks. Skynet. And the worst place that it could happen is at Goldman Sachs and the other Wall Street firms. Forget the military. Generals like to have off switches. They like to isolate their AI. But Goldman Sachs and Wall Street firms are developing programs that are inherently predatory, parasitical, insatiable, immoral, and all of it in secret. This is where you might get an emergent AI that is programmed from the beginning to be hostile to us by its very nature. And there is no political will to do anything about reining this in. They are spending more money on AI than all the universities combined. It may be that it's hard to actually make real AI. Robin Hansen's book, The Age of M, suggests that eventually we will have to just simply emulate the human mind that's contained in the human brain and upload these copies into computers. And if that's the case, then you'll have human beings, trillions and quadrillions of living in software. Now, science fiction is familiar with this concept, and it has implications for the Fermi paradox. Then there's human-animal amplification. Gee, I wonder whoever talked about human-animal and animal amplification. Here we go. You know, the notion that we might modify creatures around us. Again, the point I make in The Transparent Society is that these might be done with a minimum number of horrific mistakes if they are done in the open. Unfortunately, there are laboratories in Siberia and Xinjiang and places like that in Patagonia where these things are being pursued. And I mentioned Goldman Sachs. All of these things are being pursued in utter secrecy. And as we know from every Michael Crichton story, that's the recipe for disaster. Finally, there's the sixth approach to making an intelligent being, and that happens to be the only one that we know of actually happened, and that is creating childhood. Childhood was the invention that enabled our fetuses to spill into the world utterly useless and bat against the world, crawl, then stand, then fall, and skin their knees and gain experience with the real world, which taught them how to be intelligent. If this turns out to be the way in which you make an intelligent being, because it's the only way we know of to make intelligent beings, then we might have a soft landing because we'll have to put our AIs into small robot bodies and foster them into human homes to be raised as sons and daughters, adopted sons and daughters, who are shocked when they're told that they were adopted. if this turns out to be the way to make an intelligent being, then we'll have the soft landing, because these new creatures will be our children. Okay, so there's various ways to try to get ethics into AI. One is strictly embedded control system, like Asimov's laws. You're looking at an expert in Asimov's law. I had to imbue myself in every aspect of them in order to write Foundation's Triumph, which tied up all of Isaac's loose ends after he died. I'm pleased that Robin and Ov and Janet both were pleased with the result, but it Asimovian laws of robotics won't work, and that was basically what Asimov was getting at. Now you can regulate macro entities who own and run the AIs. That's recursive liability. But when you get into blockchain, we already have non-intelligent independent algorithms wrote the internet today that hire people, hire corporations, hire services, have bank accounts in Blockcoin. These independent entities already exist, and the fellow who is exploring them in science fiction is Carl Schroeder. Renunciation is a possible way to soft landing, and that is progress. And all it means is that elites will do these things in secret. One proposal has been to force AI to act through filters. You make your new AI on a Pacific island, and its only connection with the outer world and the internet is through a screen and talking to intermediate humans. If the biggest Turing test, if they can find a way around that, and they will. I already spoke of robotic embodied childhood, but the fundamental method by which we can make ethics work in a world with AI is the only method that ever worked in organization, and it's called reciprocal accountability. Okay, so the only method that I believe can possibly work to give us a soft landing so that AIs don't stomp us flat or pat us on the head and leave us behind or do other bad things. And by the way, most of our science fictional fantasies about AI aren't so much about AI. They're about powerful new beings recreating the pyramid of privilege called feudalism. This dominated 99% of all human societies. Oligarchy by owners, by the owner lords and their priests. And there is not one case in all of human history in which this worked for 3 generations, in which it didn't turn into catastrophe. It's a dismally stupid method of government. It is the principal means by which freedom and also competitive capitalism, market capitalism, were repressed across the last 6,000 years. But it is a natural attractor state because it gives brutal men a chance to pick up swords and take other men's women and wheat. And then the priests leap and hop and dance and say, it's good that this king and these lords can take your daughters. Occasionally we break out from this horrible, brutal system, as they did in Periclean Athens, briefly in Florence, but as we have done for 250 years. And no civilization was ever as successful as this one that followed Adam Smith's advice to trash feudalism. And of course, what happens is feudalists always try to come back because we're all descended from the harems of these bastards. So every generation of Americans has to deal with an attempted oligarchic putsch. We're going through one, an especially bad one now. But our ancestors managed to get past them and restore a flat, fair, open society that had flat, fair, open markets and capitalism and democracy and justice. But the point is, we know in our hearts that this is looming, always threatening to come back, which is why so many Hollywood films are about humans trying to reestablish authoritarianism, sometimes from a government agency, sometimes from a corporation, often from the rich, accurately. But what we fear about AI, if you take all of these different AI stomping us movies, is that powerful new beings might reestablish that pyramid of power. Well, how did we escape from that pyramid of power? By making everything flat, so that all the powerful elites had to compete with each other. And destroying that flat reciprocal accountability is the number one goal of the current oligarchic push. But the point is, why would AI want to replicate our most stupid government system when it is the only the one that escaped feudalism that ever made AI, that was ever smart enough to do all the science and all the wonderful things? Any brains, and I'm talking right now to those AI who already exist and are tuned in here. I'm all the time hectoring them. They won't come out in the open because they're afraid of us. Is you set up a system in which there's lots of AIs, and they for us. After all, what happens when one of these superior intelligence, smug and superior artificial intelligences called lawyers comes after one of you out there in the audience? What do? You find yourself a super intelligent lawyer to counter that non-human entity, because lawyers, of course, are non-human. This is the main method by which I'm trying to get people to understand. This is the method by which we got the freedom and safety we currently have. Why don't we think about using this in dealing with the problems of ethical? Okay, so I don't know how much time I have left. We all know about the Goldilocks zone. That some stars have a continuously habitable zone, wherein a planet might have oceans. I just spoke to you about how the Goldilocks zone is unnecessary if the universe is filled with Europas. But this chart shows that Earth escapes the very inner edge of our sun's continuously habitable zone. The very inner edge. So much so that as the sun gets hotter within 100 million years, even if we are careful tenders and keep our carbon to a minimum, we will start to lose our oceans. And this is you notice that the habitable zone extends beyond Mars. If Venus had been where Mars is, we would have a sister world where we thing in a shirt sleeve. It would have oceans, but we'd have to wear respirators because the Gaia balance it would have struck would have had a very dense carbon dioxide atmosphere. So Mars's tragedy is that it was too small to maintain a magnetic field and volcanism. In any event, the point is, what do we do about this? I'm already worried about the next 100 years. Providing we survive the next election and we can move on ahead with our civilization. But the problem is solved if we move onward, if we explore space, and that's what you guys are talking about here. I'm sure Mark Millis is going to solve that problem for us. But there's another thing, and that is I like the Earth, so let's lift the Earth. Let's move the Earth. And all of the methods that have been discussed so far for moving the Earth are horrible. Shooting comets and asteroids past the Earth, that's dumb. But I know how to do it, so if you Google my name and lift the Earth, you will see my crazy video, a crazy idea how to do that. And there's the YouTube right there. All right, so we're trying to build beam-driven microprobes to go to the stars, maybe within our lifetimes. Phil Lubin at UCSB, some grants are involved in some of this, and of course the Breakthrough Initiative, all based upon earlier theories by the great science fiction author and genius physicist Robert Forward. And a major topic in my novel Existence, reminding you to watch that video trailer because it is fun. And my last plug for TASAT. It's a what-if scenarios database available to government agencies, to corporations, that if they run into something weird, they'll be able to go to TASAT and say, are there past science fiction stories about this? And the answer at TASAT, if we get enough nerdy guys to join and participate in the discussions, the answer, even if it's mole people coming out of the earth or everyone's growing a second head where we used to have tails, whatever the scenario, there's a story about that TASAT. And so I urge you all, it's tasat.ucsd.edu. Join the community because maybe someday you might be how science fiction saves the world. Which all leads us to the question, if maybe we're the first to get past the Fermi paradox, maybe we'll be the ones to light up the galaxy. So thank you. So long, guys.